So as part of a second conversation with Dr. Annelieke Mooij, we'll try and understand what is the impact of Metaverse on political rights. So Annelieke, in terms of political rights, where do you stand on the impact? What are the challenges that Metaverse poses to our political rights?
Yeah, so that's a great place to start. And let's imagine something that we all do, shopping. Now, if we go to a physical shop and we buy some products, whether it's clothing or whether it's groceries, and we find out, well, these products were actually made by destroying the rainforest. So we're angry. We don't want to contribute to that. So we want to protest. Now, in the physical realm, that's quite easy. You can go to a public street, you can go to the shopping street and protest. And that is allowed because it's a public place. Now, you may not go into the shop to protest because that's a private shop, but you can protest nearby. Now, and this is where the challenge of the metaverse comes in, because most of these virtual environments are provided by private companies. They have a lot more freedom to say, well, I don't want you protesting here. And it becomes very difficult.
It seems to me that it's important to better understand this distinction between public and private. And could you help us understand, does it play out differently in the physical and the virtual world, that distinction between private and public sphere?
Yes, so to understand public versus a private sphere, it's how the law treats them.
Okay.
So if we look at public spheres, they're governed by public law. Now, most jurisdictions will allow a lot of freedom for people to exercise their fundamental rights and their political rights. So a government cannot stop or prevent a protest unless there are very specific reasons, such as public safety or perhaps traffic or road safety issues. Whilst in a private sphere, it's governed by private law, and there's a lot more freedom to draft your own house rules. For example, think about a sports bar where they say, well, we don't want any talk of politics in here because it led to so many riots. Let's stick to the sport. Or a political forum which says, well, you can talk animal welfare here, but you can't discuss equality legislation. Or a political forum fan page which will allow you to be very positive, but perhaps delete any criticism. And if political debate is conducted primarily through private spheres, it can quietly shape how these voices are heard, which voices are heard, and how this debate develops.
So this seems like an ongoing debate, almost perennial in nature, the distinction between public and private and regulating technology in terms of its impact. Have we seen this before?
Yes, unfortunately, we have seen this before on social media platforms, where platforms such as X and Facebook and others deploy algorithms that promote certain content and can even influence elections. Think about the United States elections, where some deepfakes of Democratic candidates were allowed to spread, whilst Republican candidates' deepfakes were not spreading, where some voices of minorities were suppressed by the algorithm, and that does impact elections and political debate. But think also about the European Union and Europe, where data can be used for micro-targeting and steering people's political opinions, such as we saw in the Brexit referendum, but also in democratic elections. Think very recently about the Romanian court. Its constitutional court annulled the election results because of foreign interference via unmoderated social media platforms.
And this clearly seems like a dangerous path to go down. So in terms of our options for regulation, then are we again looking at questions of ban, or are there other options available?
Yeah, so it's very easy to say, well, let's ban and let's moderate and let's be very strict. But there is a danger in that as well, because if you over-moderate, there's something called the chilling effect. So people start to self-moderate first and think, can I say this? And to a large extent that is good, but people are also have a tendency to actually self-moderate more harshly than the law would, because they are afraid of over-moderation and suffering consequences, such as being banned from a platform. And this might chill the entire debate, decrease the amount of opinions, something that we call the chilling effect. So a balance needs to be sought between moderation and freedom.
So in terms of this regulatory balance that we seek, how are the existing regulations helping us? For example, the Digital Services Act, where does that fit into the scheme of things?
Yes, so that's a great question, because the Digital Services Act is one of the main acts from the European Union to actually try and regulate virtual environments and social media platforms. And what the Digital Services Act, or DSA, does is it creates 4 categories of services. On the one hand, you have the intermediary services, which don't have any control over the content that they transmit or temporarily store. So they're given very few obligations. On the other hand, you have the other 3, which are hosting platforms, online platforms, and very large online platforms, and they do have control over the content. Now, what the DSA says is you don't have a general monitoring duty, but you do have the duty to remove that illegal content once that you're aware of it. Okay. So once a platform is aware, it has to delete illegal content. It does mention fundamental rights, so the DSA does aim to protect them, but their status is very unclear, and there's a lot of freedom for these platforms to actually create their own house rules.
So it seems like the regulatory landscape is evolving and Metaverse is also evolving. So where does Metaverse fit into these categories then?
So that's actually very tricky, because the Metaverse is not one governance structure. The very simple virtual environment legally would be a centralized platform, whereby there's one company, one entity that controls who enters the reality, what is being done, what content is being placed. This would quite clearly be an online platform, or potentially a very large online platform. But in the Metaverse, you see different governance structures popping up, whereby ownership and control is no longer centralized, but shared among different participants. Sometimes you may even see a fully decentralized reality where decisions are made through a blockchain. And because then there is not one party that controls this content, it raises the question, well, is Metaverse a platform, or is it perhaps an intermediary service that only transmits certain information? So it's tricky to find out exactly where it belongs.
Yeah. So in terms of the regulatory challenges, is control the only problem then?
No, unfortunately it's not. It's also about defining what is illegal content, what is harmful content, or what is indecent content. And we can't always agree amongst ourselves what is what. Let's take a bit of a bloody example, but let's talk about periods. If we look at tampon ads and female hygiene products, in 2017, the UK had an ad that actually showed real blood and showed blood instead of blue fluid. Now this caused shocks. People started talking about it, and it caused some outrage as well, but it changed the way we talked about periods, it changed the way we viewed it and how we normalized it. But then a year later, in the Republic of Ireland, so only one country over and only 1 year later, the Irish Advertisement Agency actually said, well, this advertisement, which concerned a tampon ad that was formatted as a talk show, talking about how to apply a tampon and how to wear one comfortably, was considered indecent. So we see that there's actually a lot of disagreement about what is decent and what is not, even within a small time span within with countries that are quite close to each other. And one of the dangers is that if we allow private companies to determine what is decent, what is not,
yes,
they might restrict speech, being afraid to offend their consumers, their customers, which may not lead to breaking taboos and limit what we talk about.
And in these evolving conversations, is there at least consensus or agreement as regards extreme content?
No, even there it's difficult. Metaverse and virtual reality brings new challenges, even to the extremes. So if we consider, for example, child pornography, most jurisdictions will agree that child pornography is illegal and that it should be removed. However, what constitutes child pornography, that is more difficult. So some jurisdictions have already grappled with AI-generated child pornography, and they've created clear guidelines on whether a fully AI-generated image constitutes child pornography. Well, some other jurisdictions haven't grappled with it, so it remains vague and unclear what exactly constitutes definition of AI-generated images. And then even if we look at a little bit more difficult between legal and illegal speech, such as edgy political cartoons. Now, where's the difference between promoting free speech and generating debate, and what we consider very legal satire in one country might be considered defamation or even illegal blasphemy in another? And that's very difficult to decide.
Indeed. And from an enforcement perspective, this, I suppose, makes the job much harder, or does it make it easier?
Enforcement is also quite difficult again, because we need to find a balance. Who is going to enforce? Are we going to send in police and have police forces from a public law budget and from a government patrol the metaverse, which is infinite and very hard to determine jurisdiction? So should we really spend public resources doing that? Or should we allow and perhaps mandate private companies to enforce these laws? But then it becomes a little bit harder, because they can use technology to continuously monitor our behavior and potentially invade privacy, because privacy rights also apply in virtual environments.
So there are these new forms of surveillance concerns. And if I could lastly ask you, what would an ideal, or at the very least a good solution, look like to all these challenges?
Yeah, so an ideal solution would be a global treaty with nationally enforceable rules. This is still a long, far away solution. So for the time being, we're going to have to rely strongly upon regional approaches, such as through the European Union, whereby we seek concrete enforceable rules. So one of the dangers is that even on national laws, you water the wine a little bit. At regional laws, this risk is even bigger. So you have the risk of ending up with water instead of wine. So we need regional concrete rules that protect people and allow us to bring our public values into this digital world and keep people accountable for what they do in virtual environments, and to a part also the companies that provide these virtual environments.
Sounds fascinating. Thank you so much for your time, and good luck. We can't wait to find out more about your research.
Thank you so much for having me.